Hey, podcaster, what if I told you that you could leverage your content to get brand deals, elevate the voices in your community, but also get paid to create content for other people? Well, my guest in today's episode has done just that. I'm Anna Xavier, and this is the podcast space. Lloyd George is a digital creator and the founder of Creator Hub. He supports creators in launching, growing, and managing their podcast. And so I am so excited to talk to Lloyd about this because he has been able to leverage his audience. And so he will be here telling us how he achieved that. And also along the way, how you, if you're considering including more diversity in your community, in your content, how you can do that. And honestly, I love his tips because they're very actionable, very easy to follow along. And the best part of this is that you'll finish this conversation feeling super excited about the possibilities. By the way, this is part 2 of my conversation with Lloyd. So if you can, please go onto the links below and make sure that you listen to the first part. Before we jump onto this interview, I want to make sure that I let you know that something really exciting that Lloyd has been working with LinkedIn has just been released. So if you are onto the LinkedIn learning platform, you can access Lloyd's podcast course, and it's going to help you get unstuck if you're stuck, or just learn about different ways to create content. I am so excited for him, and I'll make sure that I include all of the links in the description or at thepodcastspace.com, where you can find all the details about just everything that we discussed on this interview. Oh my gosh, Lloyd, welcome again to part 2 of this interview, because we did what we normally tell people not to do. We were like so carried away. We were so excited, and I was like, all right, you know what? Let's stop this interview. Let's go and get a 2-part to this section. This conversation is going to be more practical, like looking into content creation. So, you are someone who I've been admiring for quite a few years now on the online space. You really took experimentation and really allowing yourself to be more, I would say probably you are really allowing yourself to play, figure it out strategically, what works, what doesn't, but also you're just like, okay, this doesn't work, let's try something else. So tell me a little bit about your journey through content creation. When was the tipping point that you were like, I'm going to try something else? So where did you start? And where are you now? Because you have been doing really cool things.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So I started on TikTok just because I was afraid to create content online. And so that to me felt like the easiest starting point. And my goal initially when starting was just how can I start and how can I put out content? Don't think about anything else. Don't think about followers. Don't think about community. Just put out content. And now I'm at a point where it's great, how can I transition from just being someone that creates content to someone that builds community? And that is what I'm thinking about now. What are some of the ways I can create content that converts people to want more and want authentic connection, want relationship, want communication? Those are some of the things I'm searching for this year.
So you focus more in the value and what you wanted overall to do and less about the form and what platform?
That's absolutely right. When I first started, the question I'd ask myself is, how can I get 10,000 people to see this? And now the question I'm asking is, how can I get 10 people to message me about this and say, this was really helpful?
That's a really good question to ask. I remember one podcast episode that you released at some point was talking about how just really the power of asking and the power of being vulnerable, especially on LinkedIn. And you were talking about that transition from going through TikTok to LinkedIn, and even what you thought of LinkedIn and how you're using it today. So share a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And that philosophy of just asking people for stuff and not being afraid that I don't know them, it could be expensive, they might say no, just asking has helped me in so many ways. And the two that come to mind are a few months ago, I launched a newsletter and I was having some issues with it that were limiting my subscriber count. And so I just posted online hey, I'm having this issue. Does anyone have experience in solving it? And the types of people that responded definitely shocked me. It was CEOs, it was people that had built $1,000,000 newsletters. And here they are trying to help me. This person they don't know, they're not getting paid for this. They're just doing it out of the kindness of their heart. That was a lesson for me, and just being confident and putting your needs out there and knowing that if you ask, there's a chance they might say yes. But if you don't ask, there's a 100% chance that no one is going to say yes.
Yes, in France, there's this saying, and I don't remember which. So my husband's French, and he always says there was this ad on television that said 100% of the people who won the lottery played.
That's good. I bet people bought some tickets after that.
I'm sure they did, but it's so true, right? Like if you don't ask, you're not going to get anything back. And so I think that was a really cool approach to it. But something else about asking is that I'm going to have to go look at my notes because you said something about you were looking at a conference and you just emailed someone and you're like, kind of like wanting to try becoming a speaker, or you're just like, getting into that space, and you reach out to someone and it had a really interesting outcome. So share with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I think there's a lot of rules when it comes to like why you shouldn't do something. And for me, I take those rules more as just like suggestions. And so like specifically with that conference, it was like the deadline for speakers had already passed. I've never done this before. I don't know the guy. So there's just so many reasons I shouldn't ask him to speak. And so I reached out to a conference I was attending. I reached out to the conference organizer and I'm, hey, my name's Lloyd. We haven't met, but I love your conference and I love what you're doing and I'd love to be on stage if you still need any slots. He responds in like 15 minutes and he's like, yeah, that's fantastic. Let's hop on a call and see where we can slide you in. And I ended up like, I get on the call and not only was he able to get me to become a speaker, he put me on like the main stage on like the final panel of like the conference. Mind you, he doesn't know me. I don't even know why he's doing this. So it's just like, it's moments like that that remind me that like, gosh, this definitely would not have happened if you hadn't asked.
Yes. Well, I love that. And a lot of times people say this like, oh, why should I invite my like dream guest to the show? Why should I try to reach out to these people who are like really up and blah blah? And I was like, well, you literally don't know what their agenda is. It could happen
Right.
that one, they had a cancellation. Two, they are actually trying to reach out their organic reach and then having more people to be guests on for them to guest on other people's shows. It could be that they just like, you know what, my goal is to be on more podcasts and kind of like spread my message without having like anything in return expected. Like
Yeah.
you just never know. And I'm gonna get a little woo woo here, but I truly honestly believe, and the more I like do this, the more I realize that if everything is interconnected, and if you saw that post at that moment, there's a reason why that happened. And so maybe the connection is like, things are always in motion.
Yeah.
And so
That's a great point.
right? Like maybe you saw that because they were like, oh, we gotta post this thing again because we are not having enough speakers. And so we need to make sure that we have like X amount of seats or like whatever. And then you
Yeah.
saw that. And actually that happened because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think like one thing we don't talk enough about is the fact that I have a video coming out about this, and I say that like 50% of the people that have like done stuff for me, whether it's like brand deals, sponsorships, conferences, it's like 50% of them don't care about the analytics. They didn't even ask, right? They just did it because they like you. Maybe they felt good that day, whatever it may be. But there's no way they could say yes if you don't ask.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how that process was for you. How were you able to secure? And I feel like before I even asked that, I love that you said that because so many people get like embarrassed. They're like, I only have 30 downloads every episode. I only like have, 500 followers. I only have like 5,000 followers. Who's gonna like listen to my stuff, or who's gonna say yes to being a sponsor on the show? So
Yeah.
please, please, please tell us more about like practical things. What happened? What have you done? And what can people do?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great, great point. And I feel like, the first thing I'll say, like when it comes to like sponsorships and brand deals is being a creator and creating content online is a skill, right? And you start, and the longer you do it, the better you get at it, right? Reaching out to people to give you money is the exact same. Like that is a skill independent of creating content. So for example, you could be really good at asking people to sponsor you and not necessarily be a great creator or not have a lot of downloads and still make a lot of money. Like I know a lot of like large creators that don't make that much money just because for whatever reason, they haven't honed the skill, they don't ask, whatever it may be. And I know lots of smaller creators that don't have a large following that make a lot of money. And so I think that's like the first thing I'd say is like, start practicing and start getting better. And the easiest way to do that is to just say like, hey, every single day for the rest of the year, I'm going to email one person on LinkedIn, or I'm going to find one brand and I'm going to introduce myself and ask them if they want to collaborate every single day, just one. Just that is like one easy way to like hone in on that skill set. And what you'll find is like a lot of these partnerships will take maybe 3 months to develop, 6 months to develop, 7 months to develop, but that won't necessarily matter because you're starting now and it's kind of compounding, if that makes any sense.
Yes. And even not just that, but also following up on that is that actually your network is the one you should reach out to first off. I know people are like, it's embarrassing to tell my friends or to tell my peers or whatever. And I'm like, those are actually the people who have worked with you. They know, trust, and like you. And so they're more likely to put other people in front of you and say, hey, this person needs, I got a speaking gig just because literally I was in Portugal on vacation and I got tagged on these posts that said, we're looking for speakers, people in the podcast space, blah, blah, blah. Like, tag people who would be great below. And someone I know and I've kind of like, we've worked together, but I was actually initially a guest on her show and she was like, hey, Anna is my podcast queen. She calls me the podcast queen. I'm like, thank y'all. And she I was able to become a speaker and kind of like, I submitted my stuff, but like I pretty much bypassed. I didn't have to interview. They were like, yeah, let's do it.
Right.
So sometimes even like half the process is actually just asking because you will be taken way through the process way faster than if you hadn't, right?
Yeah. And I feel like in the future, our content online is going to be our portfolio. And there's lots of situations like that where it's like you'll apply for something and they won't put you through the traditional process because it's like your content that they see online, how people resonate with it sort of acts as like the validation and proof that they need.
Yeah, and the quality of your network. I mean, after this interview, we're going to be way closer than we were before we just followed each other on social media and saw each other and like thumbs up and, listen to each other's episodes. So that's...
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very palpable. So you told us that you had gotten like a job offer from someone just because of the content. So tell us like things that happened because of that and like how did you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So part of I think what I love doing is coming up with these ideas and concepts that I think are maybe more nuanced or aren't being spoke about and talking about them in the way where people resonate. And so one of the things I did a few months ago was realize, oh my gosh, like people keep saying the podcast industry is growing really fast, but like if that happens, what does that mean for like Black people? What does that mean for like Black creators, for example? And from where I sit right now, the bulk majority of like the content I create, like some of my favorite podcast creators, they're all Black. Like, and I can tangibly see just sort of like the impact that like popular Black creators have had like on the podcast industry. But at the rate we are going, we're not going to actually like own anything. And so I was kind of having these feelings and I decided, you know what, I'm going to like write about this. I'm going to write a blog about this. I'm going to talk about it in my podcast. And that blog ended up doing really well. The podcast ended up doing really well. And so I had people from different companies reaching out to me and offering to hop on calls with me. And in those calls, I could just tell they were like very impressed. Some of them would be asking like, what can we do to help you? Are you in like the job market? I'd love to like, figure out if we can get you over at my company. And that was the first time I realized like, oh my gosh, like I'm an immigrant, no college degree, no anything. And these people are like willing to give me an opportunity just because they heard this like podcast episode or this blog. And that was the first time I realized like, I think we're all underestimating the value of like content.
So it's just like harness what you do very well and don't be afraid to really like go in and tell me about that LinkedIn opportunity that happened. Your approach, again, it just shows you don't have to follow a linear path in order to have success.
Yeah, absolutely. So LinkedIn has a department called LinkedIn Learning where they essentially create like top class content. And one of their focuses this upcoming year is going to be content creators. And so someone in that department happened to see my TikTok content and was like, oh, this is like amazing. How would you like to audition for, we're going to be creating a course on like how to start a podcast. How would you like to audition for that course? Went and auditioned, applied, it was a very long process. But long story short, I ended up getting the opportunity. And so I was able to collaborate with LinkedIn to create a course for people that are interested in starting a podcast. And so it was just like probably one of the best experiences I've ever had in my life. It was the first time someone has like paid me to create a course. They flew me to California and just like all around. It was the first time I'd done any of that. And so I was just very proud not only to collaborate with them and work with such a large brand that I love, but I was also just really happy with the work I created. And it was the first time I took like all of my thoughts on like how to create a podcast and put them in a concise form that I feel like is easy for people to digest.
Actually, I have to ask you about that. What was it like? Because I feel like, as someone who struggles with imposter syndrome a lot, it's just like I can imagine you like, oh my God, LinkedIn reached out. Like, how was that a whole process actually? Like, how did you decide, okay, this is worthwhile? Did they support you, or was it more down to you in the creative aspect?
Gosh, I almost feel like the bar was set too high because I've been collaborating with other brands and it just hasn't felt like that. But just like they're so set up to accommodate creators that it's like amazing. And so before you actually go film the course, you're working with a producer that they give you just to like, okay, what is like the script? What are like the chapters? And it almost feels like you're writing a book just in terms of like the number of times you need to submit things to be approved. And so I had never been through a process like that before. It was my first time doing it. And so it was just great to like have a professional experience and find out like, oh, this is how like a billion-dollar company records content. Even just like when I touched down in their Santa Barbara campus, they have like, it was like 40 different studios, like multiple different producers. It was so intense and overwhelming. And I definitely felt imposter syndrome. I mean, it was like their producers tried their best, I think, to make me feel calm, make me feel like, you know, you can do this, you got this under control. But there's just a lot of things that were out of my comfort zone, like using a teleprompter, for instance, which is just like, I've never done that before. So it's like, you know, but overall, it's such a great experience.
Oh, I love that. It really fills my heart, because I feel like when I first started working in radio and, you know, like a gazillion years ago, there was this really like Bob, and Bob was the guy, like he was white and he was like, he knew better, and he was like on his like late 40s, and it felt like there was no nuance, no like margin to be creative or do things differently. And I'm so glad that today, you know, people looked at you and like, we believe in your approach. Like, you have a track record, and it's more meritocracy than versus just like, you know, having worked in the industry for so long and nobody like questions anything, or like knowing so and so. So
Yeah.
that really makes me super happy to hear.
I really appreciate that. And I think it's I was a bit overwhelmed just seeing people like support me so much, just because it like, I mean, I didn't expect that would happen. And when it happened, it was very much just like overwhelming and made me feel really good to know that like there's people that are rooting for you, there's people that want you to succeed, there's people that want to see you win. And those are some of the ways where I think that like TikTok is such an amazing platform. I think like when I hear people talk about Twitter, it sounds like people are constantly negative, or they're telling you the negative aspects of it. But all of my experiences on TikTok have been so positive, and people want to see you succeed so bad. It feels really good.
That is awesome. And so one of the things that I wanted to talk to you today was, obviously, we live in a very different time today than we lived before 2020, before 2018, all of that. And so if people want to be more intentional about the type of partnerships they allow, so let's say they are on the seat of like, they actually have a podcast on their day job, they actually have the opportunity to give money away or do important collaborations. What is a good framework, or what are questions that they should ask themselves, and not to do the cookie cutter and like really actually make meaningful partnerships?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great question. And I think there's sort of like two sides to this coin. The first is like, I think that there's like a moral obligation, right, to being fair, to being inclusive, to making sure that there's that everyone is giving the equal opportunity to get your sponsorship or brand dollars. And so as an executive at a company giving out opportunities, I think it's important that we understand that like, hey, naturally speaking, there are things beyond our control or systems that are going to make it difficult for all creators, especially creators of color or minorities, to get access to the opportunities that I'm giving. And so I may need to go a step further to make sure that everyone has equal access, just because it's like my moral obligation. That's like the one side of the coin. I think the flip side to that coin is if I don't care about that as an executive, and I'm solely just being like strategic and diligent financially and I'm not interested in the moral obligation, I think it's in their best interest also to be diverse, just because when they are not, they are leaving out a large market that I think could increase their user base, their customers, that could add a different perspective to their content. And all of these things, I think, increase their bottom line. And so I think it could be a bit tricky trying to navigate the creator economy, knowing that there's people and brands and execs that don't care about you but understand your business value. But nonetheless, we still need those opportunities as creators. And so that would be my advice. And I in the podcast space have been just very optimistic with some of the people that I've interacted with, and I feel like there have been there's been execs that reach out to me just to like that I can tell are well intentioned, and sometimes that is even more valuable than the opportunity to me, just to know that there's people that care, there's people that are genuine, they're not just doing this because they know it's like a business case.
Yes, I love what you're saying. And another thing that is, look at partnerships as long-term collaborations, right? So, for instance, something that I tried to do, like last year, I did Black History Month, and I literally, I had no campaign, nothing. And I literally just posted an image on my social media and said, hey, I want to give the platform to Black creators. Just, tag someone and I tagged a few people that I already knew that would have spread that, and literally it cost me nothing. And I highlighted so many amazing creators. I just had the time to put together the posts and all of that, and really ask them individuals, be like, hey, send me that to this email. And so a lot of people had so many good tips that I never thought about. I was like, oh my gosh, this is really good. And so it just did double purpose, and I built stronger connections with that community. It just made me aware of a lot of other things. And so what are some ideas that you think would be really good and actionable tips for people to have more diversity in mind when doing either partnerships or just in content in general?
That's such a great question. And I think to me, just some simple things that are very, very practical is, I think people creators that are interested in partnering or growing their show should just survey their current episode base, and they should just say hey, I've released content for a year, and if I haven't worked with anyone Black, I don't have any Black people on my show, I don't have any Black sponsors, whatever it may be, I think that should be a red flag, right? And it always is just so funny to me when I look at people's podcasts and I'm just oh my gosh, you've put out 200 episodes and they're all just white guys. That's bizarre, right? And so I think that's the first thing. And then I think the second is, I think that there are multiple worlds, right? And so I think that I'm in a few different YouTube groups, for example, and when I look at the content that our YouTube community leaders post, right, just saying hey, here's how you grow on YouTube, here are the creators we love on YouTube. When I look at just, for example, the creators that white creators love, that is very different than the creators that Black creators love, for example. And I'm sure the same goes on based on whatever culture you're a part of. You probably have your group of people that you most resonate with. For example, I know Casey Neistat is very big in the YouTube scene, but if I asked my favorite 10 Black creators, hey, do you know Casey Neistat? Most of them are going to say no, even though his work is impeccable and he's almost the godfather of YouTube, right? And so I think there's these individual worlds that exist, and when we don't cross collaborate with people that don't look at us, we miss out on those perspectives to really understand what is happening here.
Yeah, and just by doing that, you are allowing other people to realize that they can collaborate is a kind of a flag of hey, I'm an ally, or hey, I would love to support. So even in the future, people are more keen to think of it's also reciprocal, right? They see you as oh, this person is willing to actually give other people a platform, therefore let me reach out. So it just makes it easier in the long term. So those were really good and again, you can treat it as a starting point, right? You don't need to aim big. It can be just having those conversations, just being aware, following all the good creators like yourself, really making an effort to follow other people, right? That can be something like that.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, I just cannot tell you how excited I've been to talk to you on these 2-part podcast episode series. I'm going to call it a series.
Right.
And I'm really excited to know, where you're headed, what are cool things, because we talked about LinkedIn and there's some really cool things coming up. So please let us know how we can support you, all the good things that are coming your way, how people how can I find Lloyd? So
Yeah,
please share with us.
absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your platform with me and having me on your podcast. The thing I'm most excited about is on February 2nd, my LinkedIn course comes out. So if you are on the LinkedIn Learning platform, please make sure you check that out. I'm also excited about my newsletter, which people can subscribe at the website bigcreator.energy. That's bigcreator.energy. Again, I've loved being here. I've loved our conversation, and I'm looking forward to many more.
Same. Well, thank you so much. Cannot wait to see all the good things that you have coming up in 2023. Thank you so much, Lloyd.
Thanks, Anna.
Hey, podcaster, before you sign off, remember that you can always visit thepodcastspace.com/podcast for all the resources mentioned in this episode, as well as being able to sign up to our weekly newsletter, join our membership, or take the courses that we've developed. All right, I can't wait to see what you get up to next. And remember to continue creating imperfect content that drives you forward.